The creative process is totally mysterious. You don't know what happens between the time you have an idea and you've done all this research and all this thinking. Something magical goes on, and you need to let go and stop trying to beat the computer to the answer and just trust the process, because it's happening, and you don't have to understand how it's happening. It's happening. And it works.
This is the How to Quit Working Show. Jeff Steinman believes entrepreneurship is the only true path to freedom. That's why he created the How to Quit Working Show, where you'll hear stories, insights, and inspiration from lifestyle fanatics who left their soul-sucking 9-to-5 job forever. Now, here's your host, author, entrepreneur, and ultimate lifestyle fanatic, Jeff Steinman.
Hello and welcome to the How to Quit Working Show. You know, one of the things about the how to start a business, how to quit your job stuff that's out there, the non-how to quit working stuff that bothers me, is I think that we've got way too much focus on the online aspect of it. You know, there's way too much focus on you got to get on Facebook and you got to tweet and you got to, use social media to build your business. And while that's a valuable tool that we have at our disposal today that we didn't have a while back, it's really not the core of what makes a business successful or fail. I recently heard someone say that this person said that she's in the process of starting a business. She said that Hootsuite, which is just a little social media tool that lets you schedule your posts, is changing everything for her. Well, and I think I got to look at it a little bit suspiciously when I hear that kind of thing, because the fact of the matter is there is no fancy social media tool that's going to make or break your business. Tools have benefits and they have upsides, they have downsides, and they are certainly good to use where it makes sense, but they don't make the difference. They're not the thing that makes the difference in your business. It's the fundamentals. And that's why I like to talk to people like Bobbi Linkemer, who I'm talking today. Now, Bobbi's actually a personal friend of mine. I don't do that thing where I say every single guest is a personal friend of mine, because when somebody actually is a friend, I like to be able to say sincerely that they are. But anyway, so Bobbi's a great gal. I I really enjoyed getting to know her over the past couple of years and working together with her here in St. Louis. And the thing that I love so much about it is that she started her business back in a day when there was no internet. Excuse me, there was no Facebook, there was no social media, there was none of that. So when we talk to somebody like Bobbi, we really get to understand the fundamentals, because she's not just telling us we need to get on Facebook and stuff like that. So that's why this is going to be great. And talk about somebody who brings a whole lot of passion for their work to what they do. Bobbi certainly does that, and you're going to get some really great glimpses into what it was like for her in her career, some of the ups and downs she shares very candidly. So this is going to be a great show with Bobbi. Now, before we jump into that, though, let's talk about the How to Quit Working Facebook group. One of the questions that I get a lot is folks say, Jeff, if I join this group, is my boss going to be able to see that I'm in a group called How to Quit Working? As I totally understand why you would not want that. Well, not only did we do the research and make sure that we had all the settings right, we have even tested it. We had a couple of folks in the group join and make some comments and have other people that they know look, and it is completely invisible. Nobody can see that you joined the How to Quit Working group, and nobody can see what you post except people who are in the group. So go over to howtoquitworking.com/group and jump into the Facebook group. That's where all the great conversation is. That's where all the brilliant inspirations come out of the show and get discussed. So it's a great place to hang out. howtoquitworking.com/group. Click join group and jump right in there. Now, let's talk to Bobbi Linkemer about how she quit her job. Well, there's a little bit more to it than that, but she's going to explain it to us, and started a business a very long time ago. Bobbi, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Thanks so much for being here. You have got such a fun story, because you've had your own business for quite some time now, and you started a business and left the corporate world back in a whole different time. Tell us a little bit about what you were doing when you were working a full-time job, and maybe give us an indication of when that was, and what made you decide to start your own business.
I was at a small company, a training and development company, in the 80s, from about 82 to 89. And I had been in the corporate or business world for 20 years, and prior to that in magazines and publications. So this was a very high-stress job. And my responsibilities seemed to change every other minute. And I even spent some time selling on the East Coast, which was about as far from what I do as you could possibly get. And so the stress factor became really more than I could handle, and eventually, frankly, I just got fired, and I thought, well, this is great.
I call that the golden boot.
Yes, well, it was a real opportunity because it was the first time I didn't have to panic. I could just sit down for at least a couple of weeks and figure out what's next. And, of course, my first thought was to get another job because I had never been without a job. And I started calling old contacts, and what I really wanted to know was, did they remember me? Because I had been out of the mainstream for so long. And did they have a job?
Sure.
And they did remember me, but at my level at that time, there were no jobs. I used to say someone had to die for me to get hired.
Right. And tell our listeners, what were you doing in your jobs? What was your profession?
I was a writer, an editor, a communicator, every kind of writing and editing and communicating to any audience. I wrote anything for any audience in any media, and that expanded as the years went on.
Gotcha.
So I was pretty up there in terms of where I would land in a company.
Sure.
And people were not letting go of those jobs. But what I discovered was that there was a huge network of freelancers out there. I did not know that. And the corporations were hiring them and paying them really good money. So when I asked if there was a position, people would say, no, but I do have this project. Would you be interested in just taking a look at it? So pretty soon I was freelancing, and I decided this is it. I really can't go back to that world. I am so burned out that this is going to be make or break it. And it seemed like it would go well, and it did go well in the beginning. I mean, right out of the chute, I had huge clients like Citibank and Emerson, and so I thought, well, this can't possibly fail. And besides that, I can always get a job.
Yeah.
And that was true for a number of years, that I could always get a job. But there comes a point where you can't get a job. You're too old, or I don't know, maybe the world has passed you by. And a couple of times I was in line for a job that I wasn't even looking for, and went all the way to the top, which amazed me more than anyone because I'd been out on my own so long, and didn't get the job and kind of heard myself go,
sure.
Which meant that I didn't want it.
Yeah. Well, and when you say job, you're talking about freelancing jobs.
No, I'm talking about full-time job.
Oh, okay. So at this point, you were actually
I was on my own, and opportunities fell in my lap, and I said, go for them.
So folks liked your freelancing work so much that they said, hey, why don't you just come work for us? Because it'll be cheaper for us.
Well, that was true in one case. That was SSM Healthcare, and then they hired from within. But the other one was very high profile, big responsibility, big salary, a big heart attack just waiting to happen. It was in a huge law firm. I think it was Thompson Coburn.
Okay.
And it was law firm marketing for their practice groups.
Okay.
And I'd already been out of that world for 12 years. And they kept saying, well, can you commute? Can you adjust to that? Oh, sure. can you work for somebody again? And, after you've worked for yourself, oh, sure. Can you take the pressure? Oh, sure. And the truth was no. But I was not in touch. And when I didn't get the job, I realized I didn't want it. I didn't want any job. I wanted to make a go of what I was doing.
Oh, excellent. So
I've been here a long time, more than 25 years.
That's awesome. That's awesome. So tell us a little bit more about how did your business and your career kind of evolve after that point at which you said, this whole job thing is definitely not for me.
Well, how it evolved was that I just did anything anybody asked me to do. I said, sure. Can you do this? Yes. So I ended up writing everything, no matter what it was, no matter who the audience was, and no matter what the media was. So I was a generalist. And I eventually wrote a book on freelancing, and one of the questions I posed is, do you want to be a generalist or a specialist? And if you want to be a specialist, what should you specialize in, a subject or a genre or an industry? And I was a generalist. And also I was writing books at the same time. And it was all very serendipitous. I mean, things just happened to me. Somebody was writing a series of books, and he couldn't do the whole series, so he said, will you do 3? And I said, sure.
Okay.
Because I never said no, and I didn't know how to write books, and these were teeny-weeny books that you could stick in your pocket.
Okay.
They were 50 pages, but it was just a great training wheels book for getting into the industry. So I wrote 3, and then somebody called me and said, oh, I just read your book on meetings, and I loved it, if you can imagine anybody loving a book on meetings. And would you write a self-study course for us? We're another division of American Management Association. Sure. So that was like 300 pages, and that led to books. I was at American Management Association, and they had a book publishing arm. So while I was trying to earn a living doing all this other stuff, I was writing books, and I just kept writing books.
So you were not only writing books for other people as a ghostwriter, but you were also began writing your own books.
Well, I wasn't a ghostwriter at that time.
Oh, okay.
I was,
so that came along
I was a freelance, I don't know what you call it, communications consultant.
Okay.
And if they had problems, I found solutions. And if the solution was writing, I wrote it.
Okay. Why? So the common theme that runs through everything that you've done throughout your career is writing.
Yes.
Why writing instead of basket weaving or child care or any of the millions of things that you could do? Well,
I guess I have a creative streak, and before I was a writer, I was an artist. Not a terribly successful one, and I don't even know how good. But when I was 30, I was kind of struck by lightning, and sort of like Michael Corleone in The Godfather, when he met this girl and he fell madly in love and he didn't know why. Well, I met the typewriter and fell madly in love and didn't know why, and took a class, and the teacher told me I was talented and I should keep writing. And this is a pretty dramatic story, which I won't even go into. But she had really no reason to say that because she had never seen anything I wrote. But that did not occur to me, and I believed her. And that's when I turned a corner and started writing. And I think I always was a writer but didn't know it. It was just a natural outgrowth of what I do. And the more I did it, the more I said I'll never do anything else. And so for 47 years, that's what I've been doing.
Wow. So what else have you done throughout your career? I know you've done a lot of different things. I know you later got into ghostwriting.
Well, let's see. I did everything from A to W, from annual reports and articles. Did a lot of articles for corporate magazines. I was the editor and the assistant editor of two city magazines. I've done marketing materials and collateral materials and executive speeches. Consulting on strategy and tactics. Just if a corporation or a company needed it and it had words, I did it. So I did websites and I did websites that were internal, and all of this was new in the last 25 years. The last job I had my first computer in 1980-something, and it was huge. It was an Osborne. It looked like a sewing machine. It was supposed to be portable. And just learning to get through a sentence it's not like it is now.
Yeah.
And it didn't even have a hard drive. I mean, computers did not have hard drives.
Yeah.
So technology really didn't even exist until the 80s. And I was an early adopter of Mac. So I've really never done anything except Mac.
Okay.
And I think the business about being a freelance or a ghostwriter is that every 5 or 7 or 10 years, you have to reinvent yourself in this business. People do not last this long because the market changes, and you've got to be able to change on a dime. And sometimes you can, and sometimes you can't. So when the corporations pulled their either stopped doing magazines or pulled them inside, that was the end of a whole lucrative part of my career. When the corporations went away, and I mean literally went away, went bankrupt, left town, like St. Louis, Southwestern Bell Corp went to San Antonio, Smurfit Stone went bankrupt, Emerson, I don't know what happened to Emerson. They just one day said, we're not doing this anymore, and that was the end of that after 16 years. And that's a hard lesson to learn. They don't tell you they're leaving. They don't tell you you're fired. They just change their phone number.
Wow.
So somewhere, I'm thinking maybe 10 years ago, I was doing work for SSM Healthcare, and they wanted the CEO to write a book. And she didn't want to, but they prevailed. And they interviewed a couple of people to ghostwrite the book, and the other one was much better suited in a lot of ways, but he was very, very expensive. And so they hired me to do it, and they said, well, can you do this in 6 months? Sure. Only I didn't know anything about SSM Healthcare, the system, the CEO, who was a nun, the quality journey they'd been on, the Malcolm Baldrige Award that they had just been the first healthcare service to ever win. I knew nothing about any of it. And it was all a disorganized mess, and the person who was managing it wasn't managing it. And somehow I did it. I don't know how. And it was a good foundation, but I wouldn't say it was the house. Because there was a lot of humor missing, and the kind of history, institutional history that people know when they've been there for 20 years that you can't learn in 6 months. So they sort of built the house on top of that. And then I met somebody from St. Louis Publishers Association who gave a program, Babette Kyle. And she was giving away a half hour of free consultation, which turned into 10 years of friendship and just, going back and forth and helping each other in every possible way. But she looked at my website and said, what do you do? I mean, I wouldn't know how to hire you because it looks like you do everything. And I said, I do everything. And she said, well, you can't do everything. What, if you could do one thing, what would it be? And out of the clouds, I pulled ghostwriting based on one book.
Okay. And at that point, you'd only ghostwritten the one book?
Yeah.
Okay.
And that was, I don't know, maybe 10 years ago. And so I recreated myself, my website, my identity, my brand, what I do. The books I wrote, they started to be all about writing and nothing else. And coaching and editing have really taken more space in my career than ghostwriting, because ghostwriting is expensive. But it's those three things.
Okay.
And so it's a new identity.
Yeah.
And then another person in St. Louis Publishers Association, Peggy Neiman, graphically branded me. And that was another sort of serendipitous event. She designed one book cover, and it turned into the new me.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and we'll link all of those books up below so that our listeners can see how great they look and all the great stuff that you have to offer. I think that's such a cool story, because at that point at which you reinvented yourself, you had been at this for, 20, just based on my quick math, maybe 20 years.
Yeah.
And 20 years in, I think a lot of people would make the mistake of thinking, oh, I've been at this 20 years. I know what I'm doing. But you said, no. I gotta step back, and I gotta listen to what other people are saying and be willing to change and adapt to a new marketplace.
It was entirely different. I mean, there were really years when things changed so drastically. After 9/11, 2001 was just a complete disaster for business, for one thing.
Yeah.
And where I just didn't make any money for a long time. I mean, years. And I just knew that this ghostwriting, editing thing, I mean, this didn't happen overnight.
Sure.
But when I finally got in touch with it, I realized that it was the way to go. And this was based on nothing. There was no evidence that this was the way to go. So the intuitive, I'm in Myers-Briggs, I'm an INFJ.
Okay.
And that intuitive piece has saved my life many times. I mean, like yesterday, I never answered the phone when it's an unfamiliar number from an unfamiliar state.
Okay.
And yesterday I stared at the phone and it was ringing, and I picked it up. And it was someone who wanted to take my online course and talk about coaching.
Oh, cool.
Now, how do you know? I mean, I just said, answer that, and I answered it.
Yeah.
So, it is not an easy road. I would say that to anyone. But I would also say, if I can do it with my not business head, it can be done. I mean, I've done it.
Absolutely. And I think you did it in a day, in a time when in many ways, it was more difficult than it is today.
Well, it was difficult because it was the whole women's movement thing. And where does she belong and who does she think she is? And, I'd be interviewing a CEO of a major corporation, and if I took too long for lunch, I would hear about it when I got back. So how do you tell the CEO that, listen, I'm on a tight leash here? And there was just, being a woman was very difficult. And what was the other part of your question? The other half of the question is, in a way, it was not so difficult because I don't have a journalism degree, and things happened. I mean, I was a freelance writer and a housewife, and somebody said, okay, I'm going to hire you to run my city magazine. That doesn't happen today.
Sure.
I had no experience. I knew no one. I knew nothing. I mean, it was like hiring a third grader to run a magazine.
But it all worked out. Worked out great.
Well, I lived through it. And I ended up with pneumonia, and I, it was really baptism by fire. Now I know where that comes from.
Yeah.
I mean, there was nothing. There were no writers. There were no names. There were no plans. There were no articles. There was nothing. And so I either had to write this magazine myself, which I was really not capable of doing, or I had to find people. And there are a lot of writers in St. Louis, and the word got out faster than you could believe that I would talk to anybody, that I would read anything, that I would look at any portfolio, and my God, there was a parade. And these people were just dying to get their foot in some door, and mine was the door. So, and all of those people went on to be enormously successful writers, photographers, illustrators, designers. It was amazing.
Yeah.
I mean, any name I would name, they are or were big time.
That's cool stuff. So you're responsible for a lot of the talent that came out of St. Louis. I think that's really cool. Did that lead you to writing your book, Go It Alone?
Which book was that? The memoir?
The one about how to become a freelancer.
Oh, that's Going Solo.
Going Solo. I'm sorry. Yeah.
Well, I belonged to a writers group. I had been freelancing for a long time, and this was actually 12 years ago.
Okay.
And none of them were writers. And it's a phone call, but it's a click will go away.
Okay.
I don't know what they did. You know, they just sort of wrote in journals or did whatever they did. But I wrote that book.
Okay.
I just sat there week after week after week and wrote that book. And this was the beginning of self-publishing. And it was very rough and raw, and somebody who had PageMaker and thought they knew what they were doing would call themselves a publisher. So it got published, and it didn't go anywhere because I didn't actually do anything about making it go anywhere because I didn't know how. And then 11 or 12 years later, I read it, and I thought, well, you know, this is pretty good. So I rewrote it and had it designed and put it out again. And originally I had interviewed like 45 people, and each one of them spoke to a given chapter. Okay. And so there was the chapter, and then there was this long interview in their own words. But 11 years later, you don't know where those people are or if they're going to want to be in your book and spread all over the place in case you actually do market it. So I changed all that. I left them all out and changed the concept of the book. But it's still appropriate. I mean, if you write and if you freelance, this is an unusual approach because it's one part memoir and one part, here's what you do. If you want to specialize, here's how you go about it. If you want to get into financial communications, here's what you have to know and when you have to learn it, not on the job. So that was the most recent book.
Okay. Very cool. Well, we'll definitely link that up below the show. Bobbi, what advice would you have for somebody who's sitting out there, they're working a job, and they have skills, whether they're a writer or whether they're maybe a graphic artist or anything like that, they have skills that they know that they could take freelance. What would be the biggest piece of advice that you'd give them?
Don't give up. I mean, if you listen to yourself, because most of us really don't have a lot of confidence. So, on one hand, follow your dream. I mean, I'm not a New Age philosophical type person, but I did follow my dream. I never let go of it. On the other hand, don't take stupid chances. If you have no source of income other than your job, don't go diving off the cliff. Because you'll probably starve to death. Although I met a young woman, I don't know if you've ever heard of Patricia Corrigan. She was a big writer for the Post. Okay. Well, she came into my office at the St. Louisan, And she had an article about how hard it was for Vietnam veterans to get jobs because she was married to a Vietnam veteran.
Mm.
And I had it illustrated by a guy named John Ahern, who's still out there today. And she said, I told her my story because she wanted to know, and so I said, you can do this if you want. And she said, well, I'm going to do this. And she went and quit her job. She was a secretary.
Oh, cool.
And I thought, well, I really didn't mean that.
I didn't mean like go give your notice right now.
But she, was really a force. Very funny, very, very good. And she made it.
Well, cool.
But I would not advise people to do that. If you're the only source of income in your family and you want to be a writer, don't quit your job and sit down at your desk and say, now I am a writer.
Mm.
And I would say read a lot of books by people who write books about how to be an entrepreneur, how to succeed as a freelance writer, like Going Solo, how to survive and thrive as a freelance writer.
Yeah.
There's a lot of people out there, and there's the web. You can just go Google how to be a freelance writer and sit there 8 hours a day and read wisdom. A lot of it will be junk. A lot of it will be take my course, and they don't tell you anything. They just tell you spend $2,000 and I'll teach you how to be a freelance writer. But there's a lot of value out there as well.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of people who share and are willing to share. We've got so much to share. Why keep it a secret?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, what amazes me about doing this show, and I think you're going to be guest like right around 160 when this show is published. And what amazes me is the willingness of successful entrepreneurs like you to come on the show and share all of the things that they have learned, in your case, 40-some years of hard-earned advice and lessons, absolutely for free. And they also put it in books that are only like $15, $16. I think it's so, you make such a good point about there's just so much information out there for people who are interested in doing something from people who've already done it successfully.
Well, I met people over the years who were just sure that somebody younger and more talented was going to steal their job, their thunder, their title, their life. And that kind of paranoid fear was a wonderful lesson in I don't want to be that kind of editor or that kind of writer or that kind of professional. There's plenty to go around. And having met a couple of those people who were pretty highly placed in the Post-Dispatch because that was the place to be.
And the Post-Dispatch is the local newspaper here in St. Louis for our listeners outside of St. Louis.
But it was so big then.
Yeah.
It wasn't a local newspaper. It was really one of the top news organizations in the country.
Oh, really?
Now
Okay.
it's a local. Oh, yeah. It was a Pulitzer paper. People died to work there. It was very high quality. It is now a local newspaper.
Wow.
That's altogether different. So that the people who worked there then were journalists and reporters and fabulous writers and mostly pretty unthreatened because they knew how good they were.
Sure. Well, and it goes back to the lesson that you taught us about how important it is to be able to change and evolve with the times. I think one of the things that I think is so neat about you, Bobbi, is we are both involved with a local writers organization. That's how Bobbi and I know each other. And whenever we're in a meeting, Bobbi is the most experienced person, the person who has sold more books than anybody else and written more books than anybody else in the room. She's always the most experienced and in most cases the most knowledgeable person. But the other thing about Bobbi that's so interesting is she's always the first to be excited about learning something new and figuring out better ways to do things. Many times from people who are younger and less experienced than her. And I don't know if that's something that you consciously realize about yourself, but it's so inspiring to watch you sitting there being the smartest and most experienced person in the room, but also the most eager to learn. And I think those two go hand in hand.
Well, you can't be a dinosaur.
Yeah.
And that's another lesson I learned. I worked for a company where the bookkeeper was a bookkeeper, and computers were coming in, and people were doing things on Excel spreadsheets, and she wouldn't learn, and she was out the door.
Yeah.
And, I mean, that's how you learn things. You watch what isn't working as well as what is working. You find people you admire. I mean, there are, right now, on the web, there are some top women writers who are doing fantastic things, who I really admire, like Sandy Beckwith, who actually came here to St. Louis and spoke to the Publishers Association, and Marshall Ayton Turner, who started a ghostwriting organization, and Stephanie Chandler, who's one of the most well-connected people out there, and on and on. And I just am in awe. I mean, if they email me, I'm just like, oh, my God, I just heard from the president of the world. And they are all younger, because it's almost hard not to be.
Yeah. Well, Bobbi, I don't know if you know this story or not. I don't know if I've ever told you this, but I have, you've heard my talk, and I was interested in writing a book long before I had any idea what I would ever write a book about. And at some point along the way, and I have no idea when it was probably mid-2000s, I was Googling for information about how to write a nonfiction book, and I came across one of your websites, and I subscribed. I put my name and email in, and I was on your list for many, many years. And then I met someone. It was I can't remember her name, but somebody else who was formerly involved in the Publishers Association, and she mentioned your name as being one of the kind of the heavy hitters in publishing and book writing in St. Louis. And I said, I had no idea that Bobbi was from St. Louis. I've been on her list and following her stuff for years. And then, fast forward a couple years later, I met you at the St. Louis Publishers Association, and then we ended up serving on the board together and developing what I think is a great friendship. So I think that's kind of a neat story, because I knew you, and you were like a celebrity to me before I knew you as an individual, actual person who I have her phone number and can talk to. So,
oh, that's amazing. Well, if there's one thing I do not think of myself as, is it's a celebrity.
Well, you are. You're semi-famous. You are.
I am working with a business coach.
Cool.
And this is the year of reinventing the business. I mean, I've done...
Here we go again.
I've done everything I could do for me.
Yeah.
I mean, this is it.
Yeah.
So now we have to figure out how to be enormously successful as a creative entrepreneur.
That is so exciting. Bobbi, what would you tell somebody out there who's listening and they're thinking to themselves, this all sounds great, but I think I'm too old.
Oh, my God. I'd say forget it. Unless your mind is going, you're not too old. And if you're continuing to do what you're doing, everything can go, and that piece of your mind is not going anywhere. I can't remember what I had for breakfast, but whatever piece of my mind has something to do with books, it's really amazing to me that I remember what's going on with my current clients, with my former clients, with my former students, with the books that nobody ever wrote because they got bored and tired and gave up and went away. And so I'm still in love with the book and they're not, and I don't even know where they are anymore. I didn't leave corporate America until I was 51. So that's when I somehow landed on my feet and started a business. And it's a long time after that. It's almost 27 years after that.
Wow. So we can I won't ask any...
well, if you can add.
If our listeners can add, we can figure out how old Bobbi is.
But you're not, if you can function, if you're still excited about what you do and have an insatiable desire to want to learn more, not only about how you do what you do, but about the subjects. Like when you work with authors who are writing books, they know their subject, and you have to get up to speed really fast, at least to be able to have a conversation, even if you don't become an expert in, say, global procurement, which I am never going to be an expert in.
Sure.
Or the mind-body connection with neurological diseases like MS, which are not curable, or the Malcolm Baldrige Quality Award awarded by the president. I mean, there are whole books on the Malcolm Baldrige Award. You just have to keep saying to yourself, I can learn this, and you have to want to.
Yeah.
And the whole business of thinking that you're hot stuff and that you really know what you're doing is just the pathway to oblivion. Because you're only hot stuff for about 12 minutes when you're at the book signing and the author stands up and says, "And I'd like you to meet my editor. She's here all the way from St. Louis." And that happened recently.
Oh, that's cool.
I was invited to Milwaukee for a book signing, and it was like a whole day of traveling and a whole day of recovering and 2 hours of a book signing and a whole day of traveling. But it was really important to him, and his family was there, and he's a very noted doctor in his field and speaks, and English is not his first language, which should have been a clue right away that this was going to be tough. And it's a wonderful book on the power of the mind to create miracles in healing, not necessarily curing. I mean, not a lot of people who are quadriplegics and on a breathing tube with MS get up and go dancing. But they do have high-quality lives, and they do have joy, and they do bring joy to other people. And there's a whole lot there's so much I didn't know before we worked on this book. Just amazing.
Very, very cool. And it sounds like the learning and the things that you learn from working with other authors on their books is something that really lights you up and gets you excited. And how cool is that? Well,
it's nice to have a partner, someone who you work very well with, and I'm very fortunate that person is Peggy Neiman. Cool. I mean, I feel like I'm heads and she's tails, or the other way around on a coin. It's a very synergistic partnership. And the person who benefits is the author and the book.
Sure.
And we've done some very exciting things in the past year. We've had 3 authors publish in the last year. The two of us together.
Very exciting. Bobbi, what's the last piece of advice that you want to leave our listeners with?
Different than what I've given them already. Okay, this is just a personal philosophy, which I boil down to trust the process. The creative process is totally mysterious. You don't know what happens between the time you have an idea and you've done all this research and all this thinking, all this organizing, and then you go to bed. And when you wake up in the morning, there's a little white card on your chest that says, okay, write this article. Something magical goes on, and you need to let go and stop trying to beat the computer to the answer and just trust the process, because it's happening, and you don't have to understand how it's happening. It's happening. And it works. I used to think the magic was in the electric Smith Corona until it broke, and I realized that it wasn't the typewriter.
A Smith Corona is a typewriter for our younger listeners, just FYI.
Oh, yes, right. That's right. There were no computers.
Yeah.
And I was a lousy typist, and still am.
Excellent. Well, Bobbi, where can we go to get more information about you?
Well, the website is writeanonfictionbook.com, which is WRITEA, nonfictionbook.com, all one word. And the email address is Bobbi, Bobbi, at writeanonfictionbook.com. And there are a number of books in the store, all on writing. All of them are ebooks, but 3 of them are print. And there's also an online course on how to write, publish, and promote a nonfiction book that you could take the whole 7 modules and learn what you need to know to write the book, and then apply what you learned to your own book. So it's not just an exercise in having information poured into your head. When you are finished with this 7 weeks, you really have a beginning of your own book, and how you choose to go forward is up to you. Or if you don't need all that, there are 7 individual modules, and you can just pick the one you want. So you don't have to go through stuff that you may already know. And in my rethinking of my business model, I would say that if people are going to sign up for these courses at bargain rates, do it now, because my business coach is telling me that I need to rethink pricing.
Excellent. So prices are going up, so go.
Oh, it's going to change, because it has to change.
Excellent. So go to writeanonfictionbook.com, get more information about Bobbi, check out her books and her online courses. Bobbi, thanks so much for coming on the How to Quit Working show. Thanks for sharing.
Oh, my pleasure. I have really enjoyed it.
It's been a blast. Thanks for sharing everything, and I wish you the best of luck with everything
Thank
you do in the
you.
future.
Thanks so much, Jeff.
I hope you enjoyed listening to that as much as I enjoyed talking to Bobbi. You know, people like Bobbi were out there in the trenches laying the framework for what we do now, what we're all doing, and some of us aspiring to do, before there was podcasts, before there was the resources available to folks who are starting a business who are now. So that's why I have so much respect for folks like Bobbi and like some of my other guests who started hugely successful businesses pre-internet. And certainly if you want to live something that you're passionate about, books and writing are something that Bobbi's very passionate about. So she certainly embodies that. And encourage you to go to her website at writeanonfictionbook.com and check out everything that she's got there. If you've ever thought about writing a book, she has got all of the resources there for you, along with her online training, and she also does personal coaching, as well as helping you through the entire process of getting your book published. So also reach out to her at the email address that she gave, Bobbi at writeanonfictionbook.com, and it's Bobbi, by the way, but that'll all be below the show. If you go to howtoquitworking.com, you can get all of the information about this episode below the show. Now, if you're really serious, if you really thought that what Bobbi was saying was great, and you're really ready to jump on board, go to howtoquitworking.com/coaching and find out how we can help you to quit your job and start a business. Now, we've got a lot of really cool things coming up, but the one thing that we have in place right now is the How to Quit Working coaching program, and that's just a place where you can get literally someone to hold your hand through the entire process, someone to show you where to go, where not to go, to support and encourage you, provide some accountability, and accountability is huge. And just be there for you along the way. So go to howtoquitworking.com/coaching. Really, really great stuff. And check that out and see if we can be of any assistance to you. Now, that's it for this episode of the show, and I cannot wait to talk to you again on another episode of the show. And boy, we have got a great one coming up next time. I can't wait to talk to you then. But until then,
thanks for joining us on the How to Quit Working show. Tune in next time when we'll talk to another amazing person just like you, who is now living the ultimate life of freedom and doing it on their terms. If you want to learn how to quit working and get these episodes delivered directly to you, visit howtoquitworkingshow.com.